Welcome to the agenda meeting of the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. Today is Thursday, January 15th, 2026. My name is Katie Sieben. I'm the chair of the commission. First, I'll start by taking the roll of the other commissioners who are present for today's hearing. Commissioner Partridge.
Here.
Commissioner Hom.
Here.
Commissioner Sullivan.
Here.
And Commissioner Tuma.
I'm here.
Welcome to the folks that are in the audience and to people online. We've had a tremendous amount of participation in our first docket, which is docket 24-352. And your support and input into the docket is greatly appreciated. In a week that's been marked by tragedy and harm, and it feels as though, or the state is, under deliberate siege by the federal government, let's not forget why we're making these decisions today. The legislature and the governor signed a nation-leading clean electricity mandate into law on February 7th, 2023. The press release marking the bill's passage said in part, with Senate File 4, Minnesota will take steps to lower greenhouse gas emissions, combat the climate crisis, and create new clean energy jobs. The new law ensures Minnesotans will continue to have reliable, affordable, and safe energy resources. So this is the third docket in a series of dockets that the commission opened to investigate how to implement this new law. Based on the number of filings, there's clear controversy and disagreement over topics such as whether the commission should use a life cycle analysis to help effectuate the law. There's not dispute, however, over whether we will grapple as regulators over how to implement it. There are competing points of view from legislators who voted for the bill, and we have the Walz administration, represented by the Department of Commerce and the PCA, who have strong opinions over what we should do as well. And this will all ensure that the state continues to meet its clean energy mandates and continues to have a reliable energy supply. The commissioners also really appreciate the extensive work done by all of our staff, especially Ms. Winter, who compiled the record for us. So we've developed a plan today to ensure that people feel safe, can participate fairly, and the commission is able to conduct the business of the day. We have two dockets following this one, and because of my cold, I'm going to turn the gavel over to Vice Chair Sullivan, but our intention is that we'll conclude this docket this morning by 12 or 12:30, and then our second set of items won't begin until at least 1 p.m. So with that, I'll turn the gavel over to Commissioner Sullivan, and Ms. Winter, will you please introduce the item?
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Item number 1 is docket number E999/CI-24-352 in the matter of a commission investigation into a fuel life cycle analysis framework for utility compliance with Minnesota's carbon-free standard. The question before the commission is, should the commission adopt a fuel life cycle analysis framework as part of its responsibility to set criteria and standards for evaluating utility compliance with Minnesota's carbon-free standard? I want to note one correction on the updated decision options proposed by Commissioner Partridge on page 7. Very last page. That decision option is numbered 70, but it should be modified to read Partridge modified 71. Additionally, there was a late filed set of comments this morning from the Lignite Energy Council. These documents, as well as updated compiled decision options, have been distributed to commissioners, and physical copies are available at the front of the large hearing room. Staff has no further comments, but is available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Winter. We'll first turn to commissioner questions. I want to say on the front end, though, I want to make sure that folks know this is a voluminous record. There's been a tremendous amount of participation, and I want to ensure that folks know that if you've submitted something for the record, if you've been involved in this, we have reviewed the material. It's been incorporated into the analysis. And just because we don't call on you today, that doesn't mean that we haven't heard what you have to say. So I just want to make sure that that is known on the front end. So we're not calling for additional testimony today. There's Senator Marty, though, has asked to speak. And since he has asked to speak and is a representative from the Senate, we'll give him the opportunity to speak. I think that Representative Hollins is here. Would also give Representative Hollins the opportunity to speak as well. We're first going to go to Commissioner Partridge's questions, though, but we will do that before 11 o'clock to hear from Senator Marty, and if Representative Hollins chooses to, from Representative Hollins. I also want to clarify, I know there's a number of folks here who have deep concerns about the Hennepin Energy Recovery Center, the HERC. I want to make sure that just from the front end that we clarify that the legislature removed that particular project from the statute. So it is not an issue in this particular matter before us. The HERC has been specifically removed from 216B .1691. So it is out of the carbon-free standard by legislative fiat. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Partridge to start the questions.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan, so much. I want to start today first by saying thank you and expressing my sincere and incredible gratitude to our staff, specifically Ms. Winter. This was, as Chair Sullivan said, a voluminous record. It was highly technical. It was very complex. I have to say it was sometimes confusing. Ms. Winter fielded countless questions from me over the last several months as I read your comments as they came in. And she, in collaboration with our Assistant Attorney Generals and our senior staff, worked incredibly hard to provide clarity and organization to this record. And I think that the results, the way that this docket has come together, the briefing papers, and the expert guidance and advice that Ms. Winter has provided us is truly a testament to her commitment to public service and to the people of Minnesota and her expertise. And so I want to thank our staff and our attorney and also specifically Ms. Winter. So thank you so much, Ms. Winter. You should be very proud of the clarity you brought to this record. So thank you. With that, I also want to thank each and every one of you who weighed into this docket. It was clear to me that everyone here today and up to today has been working in good faith to provide us recommendations and advice on how to implement this law to reduce greenhouse emissions that worsen climate change. And I want to just point that out, that we may disagree on some of the technical details, and we will discuss those at length today. But I think it is really important that we all recognize that everyone here is working in good faith. I saw no comments up to today that attempted to subvert the goals of this legislation. And so I'm just really grateful to have this community of people in Minnesota working to make Minnesota a better place and to find a productive path forward to make sure that we are meeting the goals that policymakers have set for us. So thank you. I'm going to reiterate what Chair Sullivan said, which is that in Subdivision 1A, the legislature has specifically made an exception that the Hennepin Energy Recovery Center cannot be eligible for consideration under carbon-free. I have attempted to codify that in my decision option 5, where I specifically say that we would only consider waste-derived fuels that are covered under paragraph 5 as defined under the eligible energy technologies within the statute. And so I appreciate the passionate advocacy on that matter and the many public comments that we received. And I hope that you'll find that the legislature and the PUC are acting accordingly to make sure that that particular facility will not be eligible for consideration under this new law. Now I'm going to just briefly kind of speak a little bit about the proposed framework that I put forward into the record. To frame that up, the carbon-free standard is a critically important new policy for Minnesota. We are breaking ground and leading regionally and nationally with this legislation. However, this is not the first step that the state of Minnesota has taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, we have decades of history of working through a variety of different policies, including our consideration of externalities or environmental costs of emissions through our resource planning processes and our certificate of need processes. We also consider the regulatory costs of carbon through our resource planning processes. And of course, we have our economy-wide state greenhouse gas emission reduction goals in place. Those policies have been powerful and have allowed us to reduce emissions of our electric sector by 50% from 2005 to 2022. And I think what we will see when we do get that updated figure from the Pollution Control Agency is that those reductions and that progress has continued, and we will continue to see significant reductions in emissions of our electric sector. So the carbon-free standard now builds upon that strong foundation and will allow us to go even further and take the next step. But as I laid out in my framework, it is one of several policies that we now have to implement as a commission, and we need to ensure that the carbon-free standard is integrated within that strong foundation of policies that have taken us this far. My framework is my good faith attempt to use science-based, well-established methodologies and robust, transparent public processes to integrate the CFS and implement the CFS to achieve our state goals. I'm going to walk us through some of the pieces of that I'd like to ask a few questions of parties on, and I'm going to start with what I found the trickiest personally for me to wrap my head around and understand parties' positions. And I do want to clarify some positions with that, and that is with regard to waste-derived fuels as defined in paragraph 5. So before I do that, I do want to provide a little bit of context with that. The Minnesota Department of Commerce estimates that these waste-derived fuels currently make up about 2% of our total electric generation mix in Minnesota, and that is consistent with the percentage of generation nationwide. And so we are not really an outlier with lots of biomass. We're right in the middle, right on average with the rest of the country, and we expect as a commission that that will remain relatively stable. My proposal, as laid out in decision option 5, as I've noted, would not allow for the Hennepin Energy Recovery to be considered, but it would allow for waste-derived fuels to be considered through a robust and rigorous life cycle analysis process. It would exclude primary biomass, as seen in decision option 38 and 39, so that there could be no market for producing biomass simply for the purpose of creating electricity. And it would put potential limits in the future on waste-derived fuels if the commission were to see a significant increase in those types of fuels through proposals. This could be done with potential studies or other scientific data that we could use to put those limits, but it's simply to say that we want to keep a check on those fuels to ensure that we are not creating any waste streams for the purpose of electric generation. That would be counter to the goals of this statute and our other state policies, in my mind. What it would do is provide full carbon-free credit to waste-derived fuels as defined in subdivision 1C, paragraph 5, if those fuels, or if the results of a facility-specific life cycle analysis show that using that particular waste feedstock to produce electricity would result in lower emissions than the alternative disposal method. And that would be after considering all the commercially available strategies that we have in the state of Minnesota to reduce the waste stream and then mitigate emissions of that disposal method. I want to talk through an example, and I'm going to just let everybody know that this is an extremely simplified example, but this example I'd like for folks to pay close attention to because I would like to ask a few people questions to better understand those who are supporting the proportionate method, what exactly you are supporting, because I think there's a couple options within the record so far. If I could ask, let me get to the list, Minnesota Power, LIUNA, Ramsey Washington, and the Minnesota Forest Industries, for those who are present or online, I will have questions for you. And I'll wait for you all to take a seat so you can listen to my very simplified example.
Thank you, Commissioner Partridge. To the folks who are coming forward to the table, if you could introduce yourself and the organization that you represent before you get to answering Commissioner Partridge's question. And I will start with Mr. Pranis with LIUNA.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Kevin Pranis on behalf of LIUNA, Minnesota, and North Dakota.
Dr. Kuklinski.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan. Jennifer Kuklinski, representing Minnesota Power. I'm just going to step away for a second because I think I dropped my pen.
Hi, my name is Tom Radovich, Executive Vice President from Minnesota Forest Industries. Radovich, yes.
Hi, I'm Krista Martinson. I'm the Executive Director of Ramsey Washington Recycling.
Thank you. Commissioner Partridge.
All right. Okay, thank you. Let me make sure I've got my example. Okay, here's my example. Again, know that this is highly simplified, and if you feel like the numbers are way out of whack, that's by design. So here we go. Okay, Minnesota County Z collects wood waste from storm-damaged trees, disease and pest infestations, and other normal land management activities. This wood waste is currently disposed of as follows. 10% is recycled for productive use. The rest is burned to avoid transmission of pests and other disease to trees, to living trees. After accounting for the recycling opportunity and all the commercially available emissions mitigation practices, the disposal of that waste wood would result in 100 tons of carbon equivalent. That is what I have framed in my mind as the unavoidable emissions associated with that waste. Utility Y would like to use that waste stream to produce electricity in a biomass plant. A rigorous fuel and facility-specific LCA shows, and LCA is life cycle analysis. I apologize for my tendency and our tendency to speak in acronyms, that using the waste wood to produce electricity in the plant would result in 70 tons of carbon equivalent emissions. Under my proposal, as outlined in decision option 5, it would say that for this specific project, the act of generating electricity with that waste does not add any carbon to the atmosphere, and therefore that generating facility should be considered carbon-free. This conclusion is sort of the best case counterfactual, where we have all the commercially available mitigation practices built into the counterfactual. In the counterfactual and the LCA would go through a transparent public comment process under my proposal. Now, under the proportionate proposal, I think we have two different potential ideas within the record. I'm going to repeat my understanding. I'd like you all to tell me if I'm capturing these correctly and which one you support, or if I'm not capturing it, what you do support. So my understanding of the first proportionate option is that the waste disposal options Okay, the counterfactual, the alternative waste disposal option, results in 100 tons of CO2e, and generating the electricity would result in 70 tons. Therefore, the biomass facility would receive 30% partial credit. That is what my understanding of our first option on the record would be. The second option, as I understood the department's position through the ex parte letter filed on January 6th, is that using the waste wood to produce electricity in this facility results in 70 tons of carbon equivalent emissions, and now we would compare the emissions of that particular biomass facility to an equally sized proxy plant to determine whether the emissions are lower or higher in the biomass plant than the proxy plant, and then to calculate the percent lower, if it is lower, that the biomass plant would be in order to determine the percent of partial credit. And I actually should ask the department to come up here to also weigh in if I'm catching this correctly.
Is Dr. Lieb or Mr. Zwick?
I'm just going to start on my left. Mr. Pranis, did I articulate those positions correctly based on your understanding, and which of those are you supporting?
Thank you, Chair and Commissioner Partridge, and I'm probably the least expert person being asked questions here. I guess what I would clarify that what was unclear to us from the decision option, from what you had offered as a decision option, the reason that we said we're not sure where we stand on that is we would agree with your interpretation that and we think this is a basic follow the science, right? If the science says that the use of this wood waste for generation of energy as proposed that generates 70 tons is 30, tons less of CO2 equivalent than, the baseline, than business as usual, then absolutely that would be 100%. That would be 100% carbon free. Our concern is that if it's 120 tons of CO2 equivalent instead of 100, right, or instead of 70, then the potential for sort of partial credit. So I think we certainly see applications where you actually have a net, either it's net zero or a net reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from the use for generation. That's a win-win. We agree that should get full credit. We want to make sure, however, if we're at effectively 85%, let's say it's an 85% reduction in carbon emissions instead of 100%, sort of reduction in carbon emissions, we think it's important that can be sort of calculated. We agree with your interpretation that the appropriate way, again, following the science, looking at the business as usual with that in the absence of this plant, right, what would happen with that wood waste is the appropriate way to do life cycle analysis for biomass and waste.
Okay. Thank you. And Mr. Pranis, it sounds like you're thinking of it in terms of proportionate number 2, where it would be compared to some other electric resource. Is that correct?
I don't think we have a strong, I don't think we have a strong feeling like whether you, so the question is you compare it to another electric resource, right? We tend to agree with your comparison, which is what are the emissions associated with the business as usual case? So that if it's 100, if we're talking about 100, if we're talking about 100 tons of CO2 equivalent, then the question is how much of that are we fully eliminating that 100 tons, right? In which case we're breaking even and there's no net emissions. Are we, if it's, and the question, it would be sort of proportional versus the business as usual case for those emissions, not necessarily the sort of alternative generation. But again, we'll defer to, I think we're not the experts on this. I think the basic principle is if we are keeping emissions even, if we are net reducing emissions, that's carbon free. If we are getting most of the way to net zero, right, by using it for this purpose, then that's where we think it's important that there be some partial credit. It was our understanding that some parties are arguing that it's either all or nothing, right? In other words, either we are completely netting out all emissions or we can't consider it at all. We disagree. I don't think that's consistent with the science or the intent of the policy.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Kuklinski?
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Partridge, thank you for the opportunity to address your question. I think we're somewhat aligned with Layuna on this, as well as partially aligned with kind of the example you gave. I think, as Layuna had mentioned, if the life cycle analysis showed that, the counterfactual, which in our view would be what would happen to that waste if it were not used for energy. So that's the counterfactual Minnesota Power had in mind, fully recognizing that the decision options that you put forward would require utilities to work with the department and the MPCA to determine what that counterfactual is. So we're kind of making an assumption here. That's what our assumptions are based off of, but understanding we haven't gone through the LCA process yet, and the counterfactual could end up being something different. But our interpretation is that it would be what would happen to that waste if not used for energy. And if it is the case that it would be 100 tons, kind of the counterfactual would be 100 tons, and using for energy would be 70 tons, it's our interpretation that that 70 tons, as it would be measured by REX, would count fully under the carbon-free standard, because it is less emissions than would happen otherwise if left to the process that's not energy. With that said, like Layuna had mentioned, our concern is that, we have never gone through an LCA for this yet, and we would like the opportunity to do that, to actually determine what the LCA would show. And it's very possible that we could have an LCA where the counterfactual is 100 tons and using for energy is 101. And in that case, our understanding of Partridge Modified 5 is that it would be nothing would count. And so if that were the case, and again, given we haven't gone through this LCA process yet, we can't say for sure where it's going to land. It very well could be lower or equal emissions, or it could be slightly above. And in the case that it's slightly above, we would hate for that resource that actually has a significant value for northern Minnesota to be completely discounted. So that's what we were understanding. So I think we're aligned to an extent.
Okay, thank you. And I'm so sorry, but my list of names is so long. Can you please tell me your last name one more time?
Yeah, Commissioner, my name is Tom Radovich with Minnesota Forest Industries.
Okay.
When we submitted our decision options, we focused mainly on just the proportionate decision. We believe that it aligns better with just real world situation. Obviously, you brought forward an example that is very realistic. Overall, MFI doesn't really have a position on this particular level of detail and would really focus on the utility companies the way that they would interpret it. And so we have no position on whether this would be a proxy situation that we would look at or a straight up percentage. We'd look to just their recommendations in this particular matter, and that's why we only focused on just the one decision opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. I think it's important for us because we're processing waste. We don't process wood waste at Ramsey Washington Recycling and Energy, which is why we were really focused on decision option 5 and the support of the binary construct. I think what's important is that our counterfactual is landfilling. And so as we're looking at that, that's why we supported the position that we did.
Okay. Yeah, please.
I don't know if this will, I've listened to everybody. I'm not sure that I got clarity. I like what you are initially proposing, though. And I'll tell you how I think of this, it may be helpful, is that what I like about the binary approach is that it recognizes there's a reality. The reality is that the atmosphere is out of balance because of anthropogenic carbon emissions. It's because we're digging carbon out of the ground that was sequestered 70 million years ago, and we're putting it into the system today. Biogenic carbon emissions, or carbon that's in the atmosphere today, is not the problem. I mean, carbon is essential. Carbon dioxide is an essential component of our atmosphere and our biosphere. But it's like drowning in water. Water is a good thing, but too much of it kills you. So, I look at if you are replacing the emissions with biogenic carbon emissions, because you're capturing the carbon that is in the current carbon cycle, and you're replacing anthropogenic carbon emissions or something worse like methane, then you're okay. So in the counterfactual where you actually go above, say you start at 100 units of carbon emissions, but you go to 101, but you replace 90 of those original 100. So say you go to 101, but 90 of those are now biogenic versus the old where it was 100 were anthropogenic, you're better. Do you know what I'm getting at? Do folks here know what I'm getting at? So like that's the issue. And I think from my mind that clarifies the questions that you're posing. I don't know if it clarifies for you, but that's how I clarify it.
Thank you. Chair Sullivan, I think, I guess I would say that I think this highlights how complicated and confusing this concept is. And I spent a lot of time and I kind of tried to highlight this, that it is, probably 2%. It's 2% now and going forward of our total generation mix, but it's extremely technical and difficult to understand. And we are looking to the law, which says that it has to be carbon-free, and the wording of the partial compliance really indicates, and I think Dr. Lieb can speak to this maybe in a minute. I want to give her a chance because I do think that the department's comments helped me to frame up, my thinking on this, which is that the partial compliance really indicates that there's, two separate fuels being considered. And so I think that the question I have for those who are supporting a proportionate is what's the denominator, and I think the department laid out in this ex parte letter what they were thinking the denominator would be. However, that's not the position that they're supporting. And so if I'm being really honest, for those who are supporting it, I don't think there's a record to move forward because I still cannot understand what the denominator would be for the partial compliance. Dr. Lieb, as I said, your comments were challenging for me, and it took many months to get my head around them. But ultimately, I think, as you'll see, that you and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, that I think I landed where you were going, and you can tell me if I did or didn't. But I think maybe you can speak with greater detail to this idea of proportionate versus the decision option 5 that I put forward.
Dr. Lieb.
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Partridge. The department, I'd like to clarify on the 100 counterfactual versus 70 actual. The department's position would also be that that is a zero emitting resource. And so our position was that for resources that are beating their counterfactual, those resources would be considered carbon free. Because as Commissioner Sullivan's pointing out, the biogenic carbon versus the anthropogenic, that's a wash essentially.
And the LCA is what shows you that. That's the scientific analysis that shows you, breaks it out.
Right. And so I think the department's largely in line with what Commissioner Partridge has put out with a draft motion, that there would be a robust unit-specific LCA that would go through a public process, and that anything that's able to beat the counterfactual would count as carbon-free. And we feel that that's the right thing to do from both a scientific and policy perspective, and was also consistent with the way we were able to interpret the statute. And I think it's really consistent with a lot of the framing and which you've laid out in your draft motion. As far as that secondary piece where you would compare to some counterfactual generating unit, that was the only way the department felt we could get comfortable with any partial accounting methodology. And it is not our preference to go in that direction. Our preference is to go with the binary that you've laid out in your draft motion. But if the commission is interested in doing some sort of partial methodology, then what we've described with that calculation with the imaginary, like sort of counterfactual baseline generating unit is the way we feel that you could potentially do it sort of in line with what's laid out by the statute. But I think your statutory interpretation in your draft motion is something that we're more comfortable with.
Commissioner Partridge? Oh, Commissioner, we got a clarifying question from Mr. Whitty, our attorney.
Could we just have the witness name identify herself?
Oh, yeah, Dr. Lieb.
Sorry.
Who are you?
I'm Sydney Lieb with the Minnesota Department of Commerce.
Thank you.
Commissioner Tuma.
Commissioner Partridge, I like the work you did. It's spent me time to try to figure this one out, and I did spin this around in my head as much as possible. As you know from the last time we were on this, I was trying to struggle with, I don't want, somebody burning slash in the Big Island of Hawaii to be able to get benefits that somebody who was actually trying to do the same thing here in Minnesota and to protect our environment, protect our woods, not be treated the same. And so that was where I really was tipping on this. And I really appreciate, I think, the way I'm going to call it the Partridge Protocol here, the PP. I think after I started to understand it, I like it. And I think one of the things that are missing, Ms. Kukluski, is that facility. I know what we're talking about. I mean, we can talk hypotheticals. We're talking about facilities that you're using that are meaningful for Minnesota's economy. And again, it's a small percentage of your load. Easily, with a good credit system, would be covered and still could run without a huge expense as we see it today. Who knows what it's going to be like in 2037. But that's where my mind started going, is 2037 and what would happen. And I think what people have missed in this, and I think the beauty of the way the legislature did draft it, it's a difficult bill, okay? I know it took a lot of bringing people together to get comfortable with it. And so this was one of the areas that was left a little vague because of that, I think. But I think what people miss is the concept in 2037, Minnesota Power is almost there. And I think a lot of people anticipate that's where we're going to be. You're 95% of the way, you're 98% of the way. And boy, you're really close. And I think what they've built into this, and they really tie us back to, is subdivision 2B, the modifications or delay of the standard. And that seemed to give us a lot of runway to do some things. And in particular, where it says in that, so it would be 2BD, okay, when considering whether to delay or modify implementation of the standard obligation, the Commission must give due consideration to a preference for EATS, okay, electric generation technology from eligible energy technology. So I'm supposed to give an EATS, and there's no question biomass is an EATS. Okay, it's a kind of the funny thing about this statute. You could theoretically have something that doesn't qualify as carbon free also meets your energy, your renewable RES, old RES standard, what now we call EATS. Okay, and so when I look at this statute, the legislature was saying to us, that facility you are using to burn waste, if it gets to that 100 versus 101, okay, maybe not qualify as right up the upfront carbon free, okay, but when you come to us and you say, we're 2% short and we need to do something, and that other 2% is this expensive hydrogen technology that will increase the rates for ratepayers by, 150%. But you know what? We have this EATS sitting out there in Duluth or in Virginia or wherever you have built them, okay, it's sitting there and it's only 1% over. It's not looking bad. And oh, by the way, the legislature told you, Commissioner Tuma, you're to look to EATS first. And so what I see with the protocol, the way it's designed, is that facility may not qualify as carbon free, but there's a good chance, okay, we're going to put it into your plan to modify if you don't get to 100%. And we anticipate that. I think the legislature anticipated that. We worked a lot on off-ramps for the renewable energy standards, and they were never used. I anticipate this off-ramp or this, and it's really not an off-ramp, it's a modification to meet something, would be used. And so I'm not too fearful that we would do something that would destroy the ability for you to use that in a future paradigm under a carbon-free standard because the legislature has laid this out. Now, we have to do a whole lot of considerations to get there. But that's what got me comfortable with that 100 versus the 101. But I want to give you an argument because nobody really made that argument because you don't want to make it because it harms your position where you want to go now. And the other side doesn't want to make it because they want you to be not even in it at 70. So I want to hear your response to me becoming comfortable with this, all in or all out at one point above, one tick above. If I know I have this tool, I won't have it because I'll be babbling. Well, hopefully I'm still babbling in a nursing home in 2037, but you'll probably be dealing with this. So help me out. Is that giving me comfort? Tell me whether it is or not, or shouldn't give me comfort.
Dr. Kuklinski.
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Tuma, thank you for the question and also for kind of explaining your rationale. And I mean, Minnesota Power is hoping to meet the carbon-free standard in 2040 without modification or delay. So the company is in the middle of its 2025 IRP right now and is not planning to need a modification or delay, but do understand, there are a number of items in this statute that require the commission to think of a number of other things that are in the public interest in addition to environmental stewardship. And so I do appreciate that clarification and thank you for making that point. In response, I might say that I think our concern is less about whether or not we would have a facility in 2037 even still operating if there was an all or nothing approach. I think whatever decision is made here by the commission today will impact the resource decisions that we evaluate as a company and then bring to the commission to evaluate. And so I think our concern is maybe twofold. One is we do have a facility that only makes up 1% of our generation portfolio. It's a 60 megawatt facility in Duluth that not only serves as a renewable resource for our customers, but also serves a really important reliability role in the Duluth area, particularly when transmission lines are coming in and out of service or being rebuilt, and has been called on quite a lot in recent months and even the recent years. And so we are, that's a facility that burns a local, affordable, and accessible resource. And so our concern is what might happen to that with an all or nothing approach if it would be in the best interest of ratepayers to keep investing in that facility with an all or nothing approach. And I do recognize that there are parties in the room who, have strong feelings about that facility. And so I do want to recognize that. But I think we have another concern, and that's in our 2025 IRP. We did propose evaluating a potential partial refuel using biomass resources at Boswell. And, I can't say here today that we could commit, to doing that refuel. We would have to do all of the evaluation to ensure that it is economic and that it's, in the best interest of our customers before we would bring something like that to the commission. But we do feel that all or nothing approach, the binary approach, would close the door to that investment. And so, and the reason we say that is because, any resource decision we make is costly. And so we would want to make sure that we are investing in resources as we can that would be eligible, right, under the carbon-free standard, to an extent, and so, or to the extent possible that we can. And so I think that's more our concern, and I'll just share that, that decision or that commitment, I don't want to say decision because it's not a decision, that's the wrong word, but the commitment we made in our IRP was based on feedback we received through our 1-year IRP engagement process from local stakeholders up in Northeast Minnesota. But I will say that we have another concern, and it's real, and it's something we experienced last spring about wildfire mitigation and forest management. And we are concerned about the amount of biomass that is available and whether or not it would be cleaned up, that whether or not there would be sort of an incentive to get all of that out of the woods, which does serve as a fuel source in the event of wildfires. And we see that, biomass facilities kind of can serve that public interest too while converting energy for customers. So it's a long response, but I would say that's kind of our concern. And I will say it's not that Minnesota Power thinks if it's 101 that it should be fully carbon free. So that, and I didn't clarify that, Commissioner Partridge, but that is not Minnesota Power's position. And I'll say we had a very simple scenario at Minnesota Power when I was trying to work through this too, because it's a little bit above my head, but ours was 120, right? What if the facility is 120 tons and the counterfactual is 100? So I know that number, it's 83%. And so our position was that 83% of the RECs generated by that facility would count towards the carbon-free standard. The rest would not, because they are not carbon-free.
I would like to call on Senator Marty because he's here, and I want to make sure that he has the opportunity to speak. But Dr. Kuklinski, based on the way I understand the binary framework, that I don't see how, if you want to do something at Boswell, how it could prohibit that. If under the LCA shows that you're not increasing anthropogenic emissions, like that's what the binary approach does, is it puts a lock on those anthropogenic emissions. If your binary, or if your biogenic emissions are a little bit higher or the same or less, that, as I said before, that's okay. But I don't see how, and fundamentally what the carbon-free standard is about reducing anthropogenic emissions down to zero. So I don't see how Minnesota Power could anticipate or could be thinking about doing something at Boswell that would actually increase anthropogenic emissions. So maybe my feet are not in concrete on this yet, but I don't see how the binary approach would preclude you. Anyways, and I didn't give you an opportunity to respond to that by design. So, but you can respond later if you want. But I'm going to now turn to Senator Marty, and if Representative Hollins, if you'd like to speak, feel free. I see she's okay for now. Senator Marty, welcome to the commission. It's nice to see you. As always, your bow tie looks nice and dapper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate the chance to be here with you, and I'm Senator John Marty, as I think a lot of you know, and I'm pushing back on some of what the discussion is here today and what I think is being looked at. But I'm one of the 40-some legislators who signed a letter to the commission last September, I think it was, suggesting that carbon-free means what the legislature defined it to mean when the law passed in 2023, a technology that generates electricity without emitting carbon dioxide. I'm not here talking about what I'd like the law to say and everything else, but what the actual wording is. It's not ambiguous. It divides technologies into two categories. One, those that emit carbon dioxide when producing electricity, and those that don't. I know you're looking at the life cycle analysis, but I would suggest that if the legislature wanted a life cycle analysis, we could have done so as we did in the Natural Gas Innovation Act. And that was a different situation. There we required the commission to compare life cycle emissions of burning natural gas because that law was about exploring options to reduce emissions. But the intent behind the carbon-free standard was different, to drive electricity sector solely to carbon-free options that already exist. Carbon-free standard does not need a life cycle analysis because the statute tells us what qualifies as carbon-free. Technologies that do not emit carbon dioxide while generating electricity. Fossil fuel generated power, even with carbon capture, doesn't meet the definition of carbon-free laws. The law's partial compliance for facilities with some carbon-free and some not, supposing a facility with wind and gas, even with carbon capture, we count the wind, not the gas, even with mitigation. Burning biomass or waste is also climate defeating in the sense that burning wood for energy is, first of all, it's more puts more carbon into the atmosphere than burning coal for the same amount of power. They They're less energy dense. You need to burn more tons. Scientific analysis shows that trees, as you know, take decades to recover the CO2 released by burning. So assuming neutral emissions over a life cycle implies climate change is not something we need to do now. We can do it over decades. Even burning only residues from logging is net additive to the atmosphere for decades compared to burning to letting it decompose in the forest. And you know there are other pollutants from burning biomass, nitric oxides, VOCs, particulates, etc. And since the carbon-free standard was passed 3 years ago now, costs of wind, solar, batteries have continued to fall. Lazard's 2025 levelized cost of energy says unsubsidized dollar per megawatt basis, renewable energy remains the most cost-effective form of generation. And that may not show up in all the models you're looking at the moment, but we know the trajectory of renewables has been consistently downward as technologies improve and grow. 13 years ago now, when Speaker Emerita Melissa Hortman and I authored the solar law in 2013, we required 1.5% of energy generation to come from solar by 2020. That's a tiny amount, but it was a 3,500% increase over all the prior solar power in Minnesota. We did so not because solar was cheapest at the time, because we could see the cost trajectory, we could see future savings. Natural gas, coal, things you burn are not getting cheaper, they're getting more expensive. Solar and wind are the best hedge against inflation because the cost is upfront and the fuel is free. Convergence the world is experiencing now in cost available innovation is transformative. We're in a new place. Legislature had good reasons for deciding carbon-free technologies were the future and moving forward would be good for communities, ratepayers, health, and the climate. Now is not the moment to backpedal. I urge you to follow the plain wording of the law and the vision the legislature showed in 2023. And with that, I appreciate your giving me a chance to do this. I'm one of the, I think it was 42 legislators who signed the letter. I'm not speaking for all of them. I'm not speaking for the legislature, but this is what I see as the plain wording of the law. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. Thank you, Senator Marty.
Thank you for taking me early because I...
Understood. Yeah. We will see you again. Thank you. All right. All right. I think we can now, Commissioner Hom.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan. So I need a little bit of information from you, Minnesota Power. So you have a paper mill company as your customer, right?
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Hom, that's correct.
Do they have a biomass on-site power plant you are managing and you are buying electricity from?
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Hom, I actually don't know if I know that answer, but I can phone a friend.
Okay. And then also, do they use a lot of heat to do their processing of the paper mill?
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Hom, it's my understanding they do, but again, their operations are a little bit out of my scope of understanding.
Okay, so when they are producing heat, I don't think they're using electricity to get that heat because it's very expensive. Their choices is the coal, natural gas, or potentially biomass. And then also paper mill has a potential left over from their process of processing tree to create the paper, right?
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Hom, I believe so.
So potentially if this the wood product left over from that process is being used as a heat source, that will displace potential use of the natural gas or coal for their heating, right?
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Hom, I do feel a little uncomfortable speaking on behalf of one of our customers, but it's my understanding that's possible.
Okay, that's why I think I understand your argument about fossil fuel CO2 and CO2 from atmosphere may have a different impact overall, and I think that's what you're trying to explain. I think as Commissioner Partridge said in the beginning, I think everybody, I don't know everybody, but almost everybody in this room is thinking same direction. Everybody trying to make sure that we are carrying out this new statute, and then direction is reducing greenhouse gas in overall. I hope we see bigger picture. I think counterfactual has only very narrow fuel source counterfactual, but also we have to potentially consider other counterfactual. What if we don't do this? I think that was a discussion we are trying to have this morning, that if we so focus on very narrow definition of overall, we may have that problem. We have a bigger leakage in the other side of it. So hopefully we see bigger picture. When we are discussing something very intense, we only narrowly focus on something that we trying to answer. But I think hopefully we can see the bigger picture. Bigger picture is tackling greenhouse gas.
And
I think
Commissioner
hopefully
Hahn?
that's what Commissioner Partridge is trying to do.
And I like the way that you've articulated and said that. This is, I think, why 216H.02 comes in. The state's statewide greenhouse gas factors or considerations that their goals, we have to consider them. They have to be part of the conversation. It's the total greenhouse gas emissions for the state, not just the electric sector, that matter. Mr. Radovich, I know somebody named Radinovich, and I want to just go to his name, but Radovich. So.
I just wanted to add a little color there, Chair Sullivan and Commissioner Hahn. So prior to my taking this position as Executive Vice President MFI, I was the Managing Director at the Sappi Mill in Cloquet, Minnesota. And we actually do have the capability of cogeneration. We had a partnership with Minnesota Power to put in a turbine to support electricity generation back to the grid. And your point is well taken in that right now we currently have natural gas as an option or as a primary way of supplying that in order to produce our products, because we have a recovery boiler that provides most of our steam generation. But you could easily change that into a from natural gas to biomass with the existing waste on site in order to create what we believe is carbon neutral energy. You still can't get away from the fact that regardless of the decision that you make, you still have an issue with waste. You know, we still have an issue with mortality of timber that continues to rise as we sit here, and diseased trees that are currently out in the forest that we have to deal with. And so we looked at it as the proportionate way, as again, more of a realistic, real life situation, again, to support the industry in Minnesota, as well as directionally being able to be more, in terms of just being able to transfer to that particular type of electricity generation is more real life, if you will. And so I just wanted, again, add some to your question in terms of, yes, that those choices do get made, if you will. I would like to say as well that most of our members do have similar goals that you have. You know, a lot of the facilities that I represent, they follow the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. And so they look at ways to reduce waste. They look at ways to reduce energy. And it's not easy to do just from a capital standpoint. But we're very fortunate. I'm very fortunate that I represent an industry that basically looks and drives towards a circular economy. And that's really what we're all here for. So just wanted to add those comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Radovich. I think, Commissioner Partridge, I'm going to turn back to you. We've been going now for an hour. Generally, I'd just like to maybe take 5 minutes so that people can have a moment. So I think what I'll do is we'll take 5 minutes and we'll come back, unless you...
Can I wrap this?
Yep, absolutely. Commissioner Partridge, then...
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan. I just want to put a finer point on this. You know, we've talked about one decision option so far, and I wanted to say that, you know, from my perspective, based on the law, based on my understanding of the science behind life cycle analysis, I feel that there's good support within the record for my proposed decision option 5. I understand folks thinking about the proportionate, what if it's a little bit worse, but not that much worse. I don't feel like we have a good record of evidence to support that, and I don't think that the law necessarily supports that. I think, Ms. Finnegan, I believe it was your comments where you said, if taking this waste and using it to generate electricity provides a climate benefit, then it should qualify. And I can't think of a better, more clear way to say that. If we are making decisions here that increase emissions in other sectors of our economy, we are not creating good and we might be doing harm. And so, as I said before, I think we are all trying to get to the same place. Based on my 15 years of working on these issues, based on my deep knowledge of life cycle analysis and my work before I came to the commission, I believe that this is the best path for implementing this law and for improving the climate, frankly. I think that this is in the best interest of the state of Minnesota and the climate. And so I'm just going to put a point on that, and we can talk about it further, but I wanted to close with that, and thank you all for your feedback and all of the information you put into the record on this issue.
Thank you, Commissioner Partridge. And I don't want to correct you, but I think you, that's Ms. Martinson. Ms.
Martinson,
Finnegan.
I am so sorry. You should correct me. I had you down as Finnegan, so I apologize. I'm really messing up names today.
All right. Let's take 5 minutes and we'll be back. Okay, everybody, we are going to come back. Now we will continue on with commissioner questions. Before we do that, though, I just wanted to mention I appreciate Senator Marty being here. I appreciate his comments. One of the things that I wanted to say, though, is that, Senator Marty directs us to look at one part of the statute, and I appreciate what he's saying. I think about that quite a bit. It is the charge of the commission, though, to give effect to the entire statute, not just one piece of the statute. And I'm just going to read this is from the carbon-free statute, and this is a section within carbon-free statute that we are to give effect to, and this is for those who are want to look it up, 216B.1691, subdivision 9B. And this section says, the commission must also implement this section in a manner that balances factors such as local ownership of or participation in energy production, development, and ownership of eligible energy technology facilities by independent power producers, Minnesota utility ownership of eligible energy technology facilities, the costs of energy generation to satisfy renewable and carbon-free standards, and the reliability of electric service to Minnesota. So the charge it's comprehensive, and I think it's important to make that point. And I will share with Senator Marty that as well. But I do want to make that point, and I think it is important, and that's what we're grappling with here today. So with that, Commissioner Partridge.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan. I have a few more questions. I appreciate you saying that, and I have a decision option that in my framework. There's broad disagreement, I would say, within the record of evidence from many parties who weighed in, including many parties who participated in the legislative process that led to the passage and enactment of the carbon-free standard, including legislators who are not here today who provided input to the contrary. And so it is the charge of this commission to try to make sense of that ambiguity, and that is what we are doing in an open public process. There are opportunities for appeals, and those are already in motion. And so that's what we're doing, and I appreciate the process that we have here in Minnesota and everyone that's participating in it. So thank you. I have a few clarifying questions. I think these are going to go faster. I will say these pertain to probably far greater portions of our generation mix, yet we're just a little less weedy and technical. So I think the Department of Commerce and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, if you wouldn't mind just parking up here, that would be wonderful. I think if Xcel Energy, Great River Energy would mind coming up. I think for Ramsey Washington and the Minnesota forest industry, I think we're good, but I'll let you know if we need you again. Thank you, or one of my fellow colleagues will. All right, so.
And I will just ask everybody if you could just state your name for the record and the organization you're with. We will make Mr. Whitty very happy. We'll start with Mr. Kolash.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Frank Kolash. I'm Assistant Commissioner with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency.
Good morning, Sydney Lieb with the Minnesota Department of Commerce.
You're good, but I was going to make you do it anyways.
I know.
Good morning, Jennifer Kuklinski with Minnesota Power.
Good morning, Commissioner. Zach Rizeki, Director of Resource Planning at Great River Energy.
Good morning, Riley Cullen on behalf of Xcel Energy.
Great. Thank you, Chair Sullivan. Okay, I want to zip through some of these. So one question I had was for the department and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and that is with regard to my decision option 34, which would open a proceeding to better understand how or figure out how to translate renewable thermal credits into energy attribute credits for compliance tracking. I think that wasn't on your list, if I got that right, and I wanted to understand if you feel that that is already taken care of or why you feel that's not necessary. Dr. Lieb.
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Partridge, the department is concerned about this one. We're not exactly, I believe it maybe came from Excel originally. Our understanding would be that, for example, renewable thermal credits might be associated with RNG. If RNG went into a turbine to produce electricity, that would generate a REC. And so we're not sure what these renewable thermal credits that need to be translated into RECs are. I think our concern is that the utility maybe has a bank of these from some other program that, and then trying to translate them to a REC would either create some sort of offset compliance, which I don't think we've allowed for in the rule up to this point. And if we do, we might want to have more record development on whether or not we want to allow just blanket offset for compliance. I think more importantly, if we're going to allow that transformation of an RTC to an EAC, that we want to make sure there isn't double counting on like an NGIA compliance and this rule with that same carbon avoidance. So I think that we really need to understand what it is in order to approve it or support it.
Chair
Commissioner
Sullivan,
Partridge.
If Mr. Conlon could respond with Excel, because I do believe that was your proposal initially.
Mr. Conlon.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner Partridge. And I'll start first with a high-level answer, and I've got Ms. Dawson-Olson here with me, who is probably going to take over the technical part of that. I think given the broad set of resources we're thinking about here, our proposals and our comments were meant to provide what we thought was assistance in determining how to calculate compliance. And so one example would be for hydrogen. And so I have Ms. Dawson-Olson here who can kind of walk through a little bit more what we were thinking on that one.
Okay.
Welcome to the commission. If you just state your name and.
The people are clear! Carbon free is carbon free! The people are clear! Carbon free means carbon free! The people are clear! Carbon free means carbon free! The people are clear! Carbon free means carbon free! The people are clear! Carbon free means carbon free! You can't deny it! Carbon free means carbon free! Stop the lies! Carbon free means carbon free! Don't manipulate! Carbon free means carbon free! People are clear! Carbon free means
Okay.
carbon free! People are clear! Carbon free means carbon free! The people are clear! Carbon free means carbon free! No more! Carbon free means carbon free! Stop the manipulation! Carbon free means carbon free! Stop deceiving the people! Carbon free means carbon free! For the children! For the children! Carbon free means carbon free!
There's nothing going on here but manipulated industry science. These games have not worked in Europe, and they're not going to work in Minnesota. We have watched this farce for 2 years.
You don't talk to us like that! Fascist! You do not tell us to shut up like this!
Okay, can we,
You need to understand where you're coming from and the privilege of your state.
okay, we're going to call recess. We're going to call recess.
Do you understand
Okay.
what's happening in this state? Yes? Do you understand what's happening in this state?
All right, we will come back after the interruption there. As far as our process is concerned, I think we appreciate people's right to speak, and we appreciate people's right to tell their government that it's wrong. We do not accept, and this is a part of the rules of the conduct of the meeting, we do not accept people yelling at each other or screaming over each other or calling each other names. We have, our process is we give one warning, and if people after that warning interrupt and go back to the same conduct, then we will adjourn and we'll break for an hour or two, and then we'll come back, and if people come back and do the same, then we'll start having people removed. That's our process. Fundamentally, this is, we depend on people sharing their comments in the record, we depend on people being civil, and we depend on people giving, it's normative. We depend on people to act in a way that is constructive. And if that is not what we're getting, we will stop and we'll move on. So with that, we'll start the meeting back up again. And I'll turn to Commissioner Partridge for questions. Commissioner Partridge.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Dawson-Olson, I think we were talking about the renewable thermal credits. I just want to note that credits are the primary compliance mechanism for carbon-free, and that was broadly supported by, I think, all environmental groups that weighed in. Credits do not mean that they're unbundled necessarily, which means that they are often associated with a particular facility that a utility is trying to use for compliance, including a solar facility or a wind facility. That's just my overview of what I understand credits to be, and perhaps, based on some of the yelling would explain part of that. Ms. Dawson-Olson, can you talk to us about the thermal credits versus energy attribute credits and what record development you think might be helpful?
Yes, Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you for having me. Olivia Dawson-Olson with Excel Energy. I'll start by clarifying that the streamlining, Commissioner Partridge, that you have done in your proposed motion or set of decision options likely eliminates the need for this process. That being said, apologize for any confusion. It was never our intent to have renewable thermal credits replacing or somehow qualifying in place of RECs. This was part, in our earlier comments, a more nuanced conversation around hydrogen and how an LCA is conducted as part of the renewable thermal credit process. And to the extent that that came up, making sure that there was a process to kind of streamline how you carry that information through. But we do not feel that this decision option is necessary if the streamlined motion is adopted.
Okay. Thank you. I don't need further information, but I would ask Mr. Whitty if we can remove that from my proposed motion at a later date if that is what the commission chooses to consider and vote on.
Mr. Whitty.
Removing what specifically?
Number 34.
34, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. My next question is on decision option number 32. This is again for the Department of Commerce and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I had not included decision option 32 in my proposed motion because I felt that it was largely covered through other guidance we had adopted in the docket. But I would like to understand if you feel like it's still necessary, and then if so, maybe hear from others whether they think it would be helpful or necessary. Dr. Lieb or Commissioner Kolash.
Dr. Lieb.
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Partridge, the department felt 32 was necessary to have a compliance mechanism for CCS.
Okay, I see. And Dr. Lieb, do you feel like the decision option, let me look and see, I think 56, my agency modified Partridge New 56 that lays out the process for filing with the commission for consideration of any facilities with CCS, could it be handled in those project-specific filings?
Just a second, I'm going to check with our analyst on this one.
Mr. Zwick, welcome to the commission. If you just introduce yourself.
I am Ari Zwick with the Minnesota Department of Commerce. Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Partridge. So the reasoning that we added that language is because we have developed the record on the subject already, and we want to be clear that there's a compliance mechanism, so we don't have to have this whole discussion about like whether you're granting credit based on how much carbon you're capturing, as opposed to normalizing it to energy use, which is there's different positions on this, but that's ours. And so we'd rather just have like a firm, this is how this process is going to work, and then all the indirect emissions things that are added to that decision option over what we had, which was a more simplified framework, those are all still subject to debate. Like, you know, how many pumps you're counting, you know, the electricity used to get it to your final destination in a CO2 pipeline. That's happening during electricity generation. Those are indirect emissions. All of those really nitty-gritty decisions are still covered by the decision option. We just wanted the compliance part added so that there's not ambiguity about how credits are actually generated. So it doesn't have to be done, it's just our preference.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Zwick, I guess my preference, being that we have so many decisions to make, would be to go ahead and allow that to happen. I don't anticipate we're actually going to get a whole lot of these projects, if any, and so I think if we delay our decision on that, I'm not concerned about it, but others can.
Commissioner Hom.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan. There are a few items. This is one of the items I had a concern with the definition. So what is the definition of carbon capture and sequestration electricity generation? Are you talking about single site carbon capture sequestration or any fuel source coming from carbon capture sequestration? Because you can have an independent standalone carbon capture site, and then you can deliver that fuel to your site, and then you can use it. So I think this definition is a bit ambiguous unless we can be careful about what the CCS technology means. Whether it's legally owned by a single entity, or is it physically on the same site? How can we stop, or if that's your intention of life cycle analysis, how can we stop this practice as a potential loophole that creating 3 different LLC and trying to use the carbon capture sequestration and then burning it without any CO2. So, for example, if somebody has an LLC, dig the ground and get the lignite, next LLC using the lignite and then create hydrogen out of it. And then LLC 3 using that hydrogen and combust. There is a 0 carbon at the generation point. Right? In that case, how can we use this process to block that kind of a loophole? To me, there is a huge loophole out there if we don't do this kind of life cycle analysis with more broad approach to it.
Mr. Zwick.
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Hom, in our original framework, we required LCA for everything. There is an exemption for green hydrogen in Commissioner Partridge's framework, as I understand it, and so that's not green hydrogen. Although there's, as you're talking about loopholes, I think the Commissioner decision option specifically mentions waste. So if you're qualifying CCS with hydrogen, as we're on the record describing that shouldn't be eligible for the CFS, that it would, I think, like outside of having a formal decision option, it just wouldn't qualify because you're taking the position that we're looking at life cycle emissions, and if you have emissions generated from something like coal, then the electricity would generate electricity while emitting carbon dioxide and would be disqualified from consideration. So you don't necessarily need a LCA study to prevent that situation from happening. I certainly understand what you're talking about with like downstream processes. The other one would be something like biomass with CCS if you're making some like third fuel or like a secondary fuel with carbon capture. I think that might be a potential hole where there's like it's transported somewhere else and it's not part of the electricity generation process. That could potentially be a gray area. I don't know how likely that situation is, but otherwise I think the situation you described is covered by the statute.
I don't know whether we can cover that with the statute. I spent a lot of time thinking about the concern a lot of people raise, and also I was considering what Commissioner Partridge was proposing. Without doing life cycle analysis, fuel source life cycle analysis, we cannot plug that hole, which is a lot bigger hole. To me, that is the size of Pacific Ocean compared to what we are discussing about biomass here, because it can open the whole sorts of issue with that loophole unless we are applying life cycle analysis right there.
Mr. Zwick.
Commissioner Sullivan, or Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Hom, I think if you want to fix that hole, then you should just require life cycle analysis for everything that isn't CCS or on the exemption list.
This is not the bill the people passed. This is not the bill the
Okay,
people passed.
we're going to adjourn.
This is not the bill the people passed.
We are not adjourning.
We are recessing for an hour. Welcome back, everybody. We will move now to any remaining commissioner questions. Commissioner Partridge? All right. All right, let's now move to deliberations. Does somebody have a motion?
I have a motion.
Commissioner Partridge, to your
Thank you.
motion.
I would move my updated decision options and framework filed on January 14th at 12:15 p.m.
All right.
And I would remove, as we discussed, decision option 34, and then edit decision option 70 to read 71, or new, I think it's Partridge, new 71. So it's incorrectly labeled, and that is my motion.
Great. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Tuma.
Real quick, Commissioner Partridge, I just have a minor adjustment, kind of follows along the lines of the discussion we had before we broke, along the decision option 56. I hear what Commissioner Hom is saying on the life cycle analysis for the CCS. But I think in the looking at the information, the way CCS works is we're going to look at a proposal and we're going to make a determination whether we're going to include that CCS. And I like that framework that you've laid out. I think it's critical that we find out what the regulatory and legal construct is for that being sequestered, so it doesn't get used for something that is carbon emitting down the road once it leaves the multiple hands. Not like we can control all of it, but at least we have to have that discussion when that facility comes to us and asks us for that. I think with that, we really don't need to do 58. I'm a little worried that 58 is a little too broad, and by saying denying a facility to do that, but we need to make sure the carbon credits that we're counting are actually going towards sequestration and not towards advanced oil production. So that would be my suggestion, is to drop 58 and do this.
Could you put that, Mr. Whitty, could you put Commissioner Tuma's new proposed amendment on the screen?
And by the way, there is copies up here. I think some folks have figured that out.
Commissioner Tuma, I don't know what Commissioner Partridge is thinking, but I'm supportive of your motion. I do like where you're going with this.
Can we ask the department if they?
Somebody from the department, Dr. Lieb?
There's one copy right there for you, so.
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Tuma, I think this is fine. This is instead of 58, just to clarify?
Yeah.
Okay.
Focusing on the credits as opposed to the facility.
Okay.
Do any of the utilities? Okay. Commissioner Partridge, Commissioner Hom?
I'm completely fine with the proposal. Thank you, Commissioner Tuma.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Sullivan. Yeah, I can support that one. I think reason I was supporting this the fuel source LCA is plugging the hole for potential loophole. I think this is the one thing that I think we can do that. So, thank you.
All right. So, Commissioner Partridge, do you want to add that to your motion and then remove decision option 58?
Yes.
Okay.
That Mr. Whitty is clear on
Mr.
that?
Whitty, is the motion clear?
Excellent.
All right, are we ready for a vote? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion passes. Thank you, Danielle, to the parties for your work in developing a very robust record. We're now going to take a 10-minute recess so that we can get back, so that we can collect ourselves for the next two items. So we will be back here at 1:15.
recording.
All right. Welcome back. We will now move on to our second and third items for the day. Mr. Eckness, would you introduce the second item?
Good morning, Chair Sullivan and Commissioners. Item number 2 includes dockets GS-24-425 and TL-24-424 involving Minnesota Power and their joint application for a solar generation site permit and a transmission line route permit for the Boswell solar project. Questions for the Commission consideration include, should the Commission adopt the Administrative Law Judge's findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommendation? Should the Commission determine the environmental assessment adequately addresses the issues identified in the scoping decision? Should the Commission grant a site permit for the up to 85 megawatt Boswell solar project? Should the Commission grant a route permit for the 2.45 mile 230 kV transmission line Genti to the project? Staff notes that a new decision option 5.0 regarding a tree replacement plan has been offered by Commissioner Sieben, and 2 decision options have been offered by Commissioner Tuma. First being a revised decision option 5D regarding consultation with the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe and their Tribal Employment Rights Office on the issues of economic and workforce development. The second option offered by Commissioner Tuma is a new 5.0 and is also a requirement for a tree replacement plan separate from the tree replacement plan offered by Commissioner Sieben. Those decision options have been filed into the record and copies of them have been placed on the table in the back of the room. And finally, on January 13th, the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe Tribal Employment Rights Office submitted a letter into the record highlighting the career skill development opportunities the Boswell project represents and encouraged Minnesota Power to coordinate closely with the band's office. Staff has no additional introductory remarks and is available for any questions the Commission may have.
Thank you, Mr. Eckness. Would parties who are, we are not planning on opening statements, but would parties who are involved in this matter, if you would turn your cameras on or if you would come forward and just introduce yourself for the record, and then we could have Commissioner questions.
And Ms. Bump, if you could come on up, that would be great.
I will start with Ms. Verhalen, since you're the first person I made eye contact with. So it's yours.
Good morning, Chair Sullivan and Commissioners. Afternoon. Excuse me. Cody Verhalen with the Taft Law Firm. With me is Dr. Jennifer Kuklinski with Minnesota Power.
Good morning, or afternoon, Chair Sullivan and Commissioners. Jennifer Kuklinski with Minnesota Power.
Ms. Bump.
Good morning, Chair Sullivan and Commissioners. Samantha Bump on behalf
You
of
said that like it was a question. Thank you.
Katie's here. Samantha Bump on behalf of the Minnesota DNR.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ray Kirsch with Energy Infrastructure Permitting Staff here at the Commission. I am filling in for Jessica Livingston, who was the Environmental Review Manager for this project.
Hi, Nathan Runke with International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 49.
Right. I think Commissioner Tuma.
Yeah, this is a really good permit. I had a chance to read through it very closely, or application, I should put. And I think the permit is positioned pretty well. I just have 3 things that I just want to walk through to make sure we're all on the same page. One will be the tribal consult coordination. Second will be the trees. That's why I asked Ms. Bump up here. And then also a little bit touch on the fence discussion, just so that we're tracking. I think everything is looking good. I'm assuming you saw the tribal consult. I appreciated Leech Lake reaching out to us. I just want to make sure it's a consult that leads to a little bit more. So I wasn't saying to them they have to do this. I'm looking to the the applicant and to Mr. Runke and labor on actually reaching out to Leech Lake and any of the other taros in the area that might want to participate and identify training programs that you might have, opportunities that might be there for contracting, so that there's actually a real, you're out there meeting with them in their space and having that conversation. So that's why I put in the new decision options, just to emphasize that. I think you were going to do that anyways, but I want to make sure it created this conversation. So Ms. Van Halen.
Ms. Verhalen.
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Tuma, I'll address your items in the reverse order, if that's okay. First, on the fencing issue, Minnesota Power and the Department of Natural Resources have continued their conversations about the appropriate fencing for the project. They've reached an agreement as between the two, and the intent is to file those plans with the pre-construction compliance filings. There's an agreement for a 10-foot fence for the facility. And so that's why both Minnesota Power and the Department of Natural Resources support the proposed condition in the site permit related to the fencing. As to the helpful letter from the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe's Tribal Employment Rights Office and the tree planting conditions, both Commissioner Siebens' 5-0 and your 5-0, I'll turn that to Dr. Kuklinski.
Dr. Kuklinski.
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Tuma, thank you for the question. And I'll just maybe start with Minnesota Power is not opposed to any of the new decision options from commissioners that were filed. I understand there's one from you, Commissioner Tuma, regarding the tree planting, and one from Chair Sieben regarding the tree planting. And
I was just taking her good idea and making sure I covered some of the cost questions that I thought stood out to me. So they're really basically the same. I don't see them any different.
Yeah, and excuse me, Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Tuma, Minnesota Power also values tree planting. It's why we have our voluntary program that already, that we do annually, and we're more than happy to, whichever decision option the commission prefers, we're fine with.
I think that's what we're trying to, with just trees. I mean, we're skipping out, we're out by order, but that's fine.
Yes.
She can take charge. She's an attorney. I've been around them before. To me, the key is that I understand that you had prior commitments or just good things that you were already planning on doing, and that's great. I don't want to diminish that, but I guess we wanted to make sure that anything as far as tree removal for this project is additive to that. So, I mean, if you take down 10,000 trees and you have 1,600 or 1,600 or 1,060 seedlings, you're adding to it. You're adding 10,000 to there for the trees that you've taken. That would be a good outcome, but I would want to emphasize that we ask you to go and consult with the DNR, with the local folks that you had listed there, along with the Leech Lake DNR folks, or their resource folks. That will make the final decision what is the appropriate one. We just wanted to indicate to you that any tree replacement that you're doing or any visual screening could count, but it could count. And so that was what I wanted to make sure, that anything is additive, and that's all I was trying to focus on.
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Tuma, Minnesota Power appreciated that. I mean, I think we appreciated both decision options, particularly because they both captured the cost recovery concern that we had raised, just because it wasn't in the initial budget that the company had proposed. But regarding which decision option, we did find your decision option helpful, and so we would be supportive of that if we went that direction.
It was meant to be helpful and additive, so good.
And then
go ahead on the Tribal Council. Thank
you. Yes, so Minnesota Power appreciates the letter that was filed by Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe's Taro office. We've committed to construct the project using union labor, and so with that regard, all of the workforce will have to be union workforce, and so Minnesota Power understands that might make it a little more complicated, but is committed to working with Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe through this. We have our project manager who's going to be meeting with union representatives, so hopefully we can help kind of bridge those contacts so that the tribe or the band is able to participate to the maximum extent. We also are doing pretty extensive work with tribal community colleges on apprenticeship programs, and we do have ongoing tribal engagement at Minnesota Power, and we actually have some of our leadership up at Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe today, and they were planning to address the letter that was filed personally, and also share some of those opportunities for becoming more involved in this project and ensuring that, you know, even down to the project manager level, we're ensuring that those engagements and opportunities are happening.
And that's exactly what I wanted to hear, because I do view your role as a bridge, and that's why I'd go to Mr. Runke. I mean, you did, I thought the work that you did on, you know, the Enbridge, working with the local communities, and I can tell you, I was on Leech Lake for some of our consultations, and they were very appreciative of how the union community reached out to them, and they're very proud to be union card carriers now, a lot of them. And so I wanted to make sure that was continuing, and that if that bridge is given to you, that you're going to still continue to do what you did before and work hard to, you know, help people out trying to find a pathway forward.
Mr. Runke.
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Tuma, our unions always, and I would assume all of our fellow unions would be committed to doing that. I know it's an ongoing effort. I can definitely reach out to the members of our union that deal in that area and with that subject more to make sure that it's happening, especially for this project, but projects in general.
And I appreciate that. I wanted to make it very clear. I wasn't offering this, you know, sometimes you throw out a decision option to make a point. I just wanted to make sure we had this conversation, and that's why that decision option was there. I think that what I see so far, it's good work, and I hope for good filings to come on that. And then last, Mr. Chair, is the fence. It sounds like you have an agreement. I'll just tell you my thinking about fences. And I know you've made an agreement, so I don't want to get in it, but I'm not a big fan of 10-foot fences, okay? I think they're ugly, and I think they need to be done right. I think there's ways to do them better at 10 foot than...
Do the deer think they're ugly, or who thinks they're ugly?
I think they're ugly. And just so that we're clear on this, and is that fence is not there for animal keeping out. That fence is there for keeping people out according to the electric code. So as short as we can get it for the electric code is what I want. Okay, that's what I want to see. I don't know what everybody else wants to see. I want to see it as short as possible. Let the deer, you know what? I wouldn't even want a fence if we could avoid it, because I want the deer to go in there, and I want them to enjoy all that good cover that we're going to be planting, all that good Minnesota pollinator friendly. I mean, even a farmer down south says, put a fence up and get the deer in there during the harvest season and leave them in there so they don't eat my corn, okay? So I'm okay with deer getting in there, any animal getting in there. I want to get them out too, and I thought your original discussion was good. So I was going to support your original discussion, but I also support the fact that you want to work out, and I appreciate Ms. Bump and her team that may have different opinions, but just so I keep getting that message out here, shorter the better, more deer walking amongst our solar panels, I'm all right with. Okay,
so 1 foot fence?
1 foot, yeah. Keep the turtles out and let the deer in, as far as I'm concerned. So, but there's my.
Do you want me to turn to Mrs. Bump? To Ms. Bump?
No, that's my pontification today. They worked out an good agreement, and I want to encourage that as much as possible. So.
You okay if we pass? Ms. Verhalen?
Thank you, Chair Sullivan. There was one other item with respect to condition 5.0, whichever version is adopted, that Minnesota Power just wanted to make sure was very clear for the record. In order to meet the planned in-service date for the project, there's certain tree removal that will need to be done here in the short term before April, and therefore Minnesota Power would provide, the intent under the condition would be to provide a rough plan for compliance for that area and the whole project as a whole, with additional detail to follow. Just because of the tight timeline, there are construction restrictions as far as where certain trees can be removed at certain times. And so just wanted to make that very clear for the Commission's understanding that that is the approach Minnesota Power is planning to take for purposes of compliance with 5.0, whichever one's adopted.
A lot of this is your land, so you can cut trees down all you want when you want to cut them down. And I would understand that, that's fine. I don't see a problem with that because you own the land, and you can, but you will count them in the process and use them as far as your replacement process. That's my understanding is what you're saying.
Chair Sullivan, Commissioner Tuma, the company will file a plan for addressing 5.0. I can't speak to exactly how it's going to be decided because the company has to coordinate with the other individuals that are identified in 5.0 on how best to approach this condition.
Commissioner Sieben.
Thanks, Chair Sullivan. Commissioner Tuma, I remember from a previous time that we're not supposed to order permittees to consult with tribes. We're supposed to ask them to confer with them.
Yes.
So can we please change that?
Yes.
In 5D, to permittees shall confer.
I was told to do that, my brain fogged on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just remember that from previously, so. Because, well, everybody knows, but because consultations happen between government to government entities, so. Same effect, though.
You're right.
And, excuse me, sorry, just one clarification too, if we go with your new 5.0, which I appreciate your additional work on here, Commissioner Tuma, it's clear then here that the donation of the 150 seedlings to Itasca County, that's not eligible for cost recovery. That's correct, Ms. Verhalen?
Chair Sullivan, Chair Sieben, yes, that's the 150,000 seedlings were part of a voluntary plan program that Minnesota Power has already established, and so that's covered within a different part of the budget. That would not be part of the Boswell project costs.
Right, just clarifying that. Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Sieben. Any additional questions? All right, Commissioner Tuma, would you like to make a motion?
Sure would. I'd like to move decision option 1, decision option 2, decision option 4, decision option 5 with the new amended 5D as modified by Commissioner Sieben, and the new 5.0, and then 7, 8, all of the subparts A through E, and then 10 and 11.
All right, is the motion clear, Mr. Blodgett? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. Thank you to the parties. And now we're on to our last item of the day.
Thank you, Mrs. Bowe.
Thank you. Next time, 1 foot fence. That's what he wants. 1 foot. It'd be an awfully weird looking chain link fence.
Little turtle escapes at the bottom.
No, they'd be like those little. All right. Let me catch myself here. All right. Mr. Ubani, would you introduce the matter? And I think we need the department to come forward. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Chair Sullivan, Commissioners. Agenda item number 3 is docket number E015/N-12-1359. In the matter of the application of Minnesota Power request to modify its service extension tariff. The question before the Commission today is, should the Commission approve Minnesota Power's request to modify its service extension tariff? The parties are available for question. Staff has no further comment and available for question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ubani. Commissioner Hahn.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan. Now, first of all, this was originally in consent agenda. I do not have any concern with the substance. I have some clarification with this. That's why I think we tried to get that outside the meeting, but I think that didn't happen, so I had to do it this way. So this service extension, will it be applied to every customers you are signing on? Doesn't matter size, including the large industrial?
All right, and if you could just introduce yourself for the record and who you're with.
Chair Sullivan, Matt Brodeen on behalf of Minnesota Power. Commissioner Hom, this will be applied to not every customer. So this applies to our residential and some of our commercial customers. But once you get into our large light and power and our large power contracts, those are individual contracts where these things are negotiated. Sometimes it's included in the interconnection agreement process or a facilities construction agreement. So there are different ways of assigning those interconnection costs or the extension costs when it comes to our larger power customers typically.
So if data center customer shows up and asks for their connection, that will be subject to individual or future the tariff you are supposed to file under the new statute, right?
Commissioner Hom, that is correct. It'll be subject to a separate agreement that will be in front of the commission for approval, and it'll be separately negotiated. It won't be under these published these tariff rates.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. I'm good then.
All right. Anything additional? Commissioner Hom.
Then I can make a motion to approve based on department's comments and recommendation.
All right. Thank you. No deep thoughts, no deep cuts? No, we're good? Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, everybody. This concludes our agenda meeting for the day. I hope everybody has a nice weekend, and we will see you next week, Wednesday, with the
dot